Well, welcome back to Protecting Every Future's Kitchen Table. There's a lot in the news these days about inflation, changes in workplace culture, and what all this means for our financial security, including our retirement security, a really important topic for all ages, those starting in the workplace and those thinking about retiring. And as always, Protecting Every Future is a community initiative of ACLI, and we try to bring experts to you that can really share their views and give you the latest on what's happening. And today is no different. We have two great experts. The first is Congresswoman Linda Sanchez from California. She's a member of the Ways and Means Committee, and if you're not a congressional insider, you may not know that that's where there's a whole lot of power. So it's a big deal to be on the Ways and Means Committee, because the ways and the means, revenue, how policy that is important to people's financial security, that's what she is an expert in and focuses on. And we are also joined by Lori Lucas, who is president and CEO of the Employee Benefit Research Institute. And among other topics, she is going to share with you the latest in their this year's nationwide retirement confidence survey, which I think will be very insightful as we hear what people like us are thinking and saying out there about retirement security. So without further ado, let's get to our panelists. So I'll pose this first question to both of you. From the pandemic to politics, the last 2 years have really changed America's work culture, approaches to how we work, remotely, in the office, in person, how long people stay in their jobs. How do you think these changes have impacted the level of confidence that most people have for their retirement savings? Congresswoman Sanchez, I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, there's no doubt that the last 2 years have probably been the toughest period for most workers to live through, and especially frontline workers more so than the rest of us. And a huge shout out to frontline workers because they made tremendous sacrifices over the last 2 years. And I think kind of that disruption of, the normal workplace has really forced us to kind of evaluate our lives in ways that maybe we hadn't imagined before. So, you hear stories about, the Great Resignation, you hear stories about people who finally had the time to start their own business. And you hear about workers finally having the opportunity and the leverage to demand, fair treatment and better wages. And so, as people sort of think ahead in terms of coming out of the pandemic to, what their work life or their work situation looks like, we need to make sure that as they're making, big life decisions about their futures, that they're setting themselves up for a comfortable retirement. And that's not always the first thing that people think about when there are all these major changes to their workplace.
So Lori, that's a good entry point for you to join the conversation. What income sources are people thinking about? What are they talking to families and coworkers about, how they can leverage this transition from the workplace into retirement?
Well, Social Security remains a key source of retirement income. It's been a key source for current retirees, and workers say that it's, a primary source for them. 86% of workers said it would be either a major or a minor source of income. But more and more workers are also saying that they're going to be relying on workplace retirement savings and also working for pay, and an increasing number of workers relative to the current retirees. Now, two things to think about with respect to that. Many people who think they will end up working for pay in retirement don't do that. I mean, it's not that common to have people work for pay in retirement. So that might not be a source of income people can really rely on as much as they think they can. And also workplace retirement savings plan, kind of getting back to the question of the impact of, the COVID-19, retirement confidence, according to our retirement confidence survey, which was fielded in January of this year, was at almost an all-time high. And it's primarily because of, as you can imagine, the stock market, people saying that they had good investments. Well, as we know, things have somewhat turned around since then. And so people that thought perhaps they might have more money in retirement than they have today. Maybe, you know, that might be something that we see a change in terms of retirement confidence, given where the market has gone since January of 2022.
Well, so that's a good question. Retirement confidence has been high because the stock market was, when you look at that 401k or whatever your retirement vehicle is, you can feel confident, but inflation now is eating away. If you wanted to leave your job because you're just done with it and ready to have more time at home, what does that do to retirement? What are people in your district saying, Congresswoman?
Sure. Yeah, I do hear quite a bit about inflation, and people are concerned about that, obviously. And there are a lot of, very complex reasons for the inflation that we're seeing, whether that's, the war in Ukraine, to lasting disruptions to supply chains because of the pandemic. But no matter the many sort of factors that are causing the inflation, working families really are definitely feeling the pain, I should say, of higher prices. And it's not so much that they're concerned about the cause; they're concerned about what they do, to combat that. And we have seen wages rise, but because of the rise of goods, also, it's almost like people feel like they were making gains, and then now they're kind of back to the same. So it does make it harder for workers to save, and it's certainly on everybody's mind. And we have to, we are thinking about different ways in which we can try to avoid those inflationary factors again in the future. So there are policies that we're pursuing to lower, for example, the cost of gasoline, to make sure that we are bringing supply chains back to the U.S. so we're not so heavily reliant on other countries in case there's a problem like a pandemic or some, unforeseen weather event that shuts down supply chains. We will have the sort of the agility and the flexibility to produce here so that we don't see those big spikes in prices that we've been seeing.
And so it's all interconnected, isn't it? If you think about our family budgets, we have one pot, and some has to go to daily cost of living, some has to go to emergency savings, some has to go to be put away for retirement. So all of that affects how we, sitting at the kitchen table, figure out how to make it all work. What would you say to young people, Congresswoman Sanchez, that Congress is thinking about in terms of retirement savings, young people or your older constituents? Because I know there's a piece of legislation that's moved through the House that will be very meaningful to both ends of the spectrum in terms of age.
Sure. Well, we are trying to set people up for success in retirement. The Secure 2.0 Act is a piece of legislation that tries to make it easier for younger workers to begin saving for retirement earlier, because we know that the earlier you begin saving, even if it's just a small part of your paycheck, the better off you are likely to be. We're trying to make it easier for employers to offer retirement savings plans with tax incentives and other things. When we were doing hearings on this piece of legislation, I was horrified to hear this statistic that 2/3 of Latina workers, even if they wanted to save for retirement, have employers that have no kind of retirement savings plan available to them, even if they wanted to put some of their money away for retirement. So we are trying to address that and make sure that it is not super burdensome for small business owners to be able to set up these retirement plans for their employees so that their employees can begin saving. I just talked to a group of students in one of my high schools about the need to start thinking about future saving. And I told them, frankly, when you're young and you're healthy, you don't think that you're ever going to need to save for your retirement. But let me tell you, we all one day get there. And even if you're just saving a small part of your, current earnings, because of compound interest, one day that will be of tremendous benefit. You have to think about the future a little bit. And it's really hard when, for example, high school students or college students want to buy that new Nintendo Switch. It's really hard to say, no, you should be saving for your retirement instead. And I told them you can do both. You just, you have to plan and you have to think about it. So the earlier that we can start encouraging, I think, young Americans to save for their retirement, I think the better.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. As a parent of a young adult who's in the workplace, this was one of the first conversations we had. And so for all of our protecting every future of community, this is something important to relay at home, get into that habit of paying yourself first. But to your point, we're going to have if Secure 2.0 moves through Congress this year, which we're hopeful and confident it will, there's an automatic enrollment piece. So if your employer is offering this, you're automatically enrolled in the retirement savings vehicle. And there's also an interesting piece that helps with young workers that are paying off student loans. Can you say more about that?
Sure. So it is a provision that would allow folks that are paying off student loan debt to do that in addition to also saving for their retirement. So it's sort of a dual kind of feeding two birds with one stone. I've been told not to say killing two birds with one stone. So, so I'm going to say feeding two birds with one stone. Yeah. So it is something that hopefully will encourage especially young workers, right out of college, to not just, to not have to worry about student loan debt in addition to saving for retirement.
It helps you get that financial security core established faster, a really important part of the legislation. So Lori, people are living longer and we hope with good health and adequate retirement savings, but they can find themselves with, you can be 65 and have parents in your 90s and be taking care of them, which creates challenge. And then as the Congresswoman said, there are disparities by race and ethnicity in terms of financial security. What's your perspective on all that?
Yeah, I think it's really important what the Congresswoman said about, people may be unrealistic about retirement, especially when they're young, but even as people get older, they likely think they're going to retire later than they actually do. According to our retirement confidence survey, 4 in 10 retirees say that they retired earlier than they planned, with a median retirement age that's about 3 years younger than they say that they're going to retire. And often it's not because of good reasons, like they can afford to retire earlier. It's because of bad reasons, such as they have a health problem or a disability, or they need to provide caregiving to somebody, and that's the cause of their needing to retire early. So it's really important to be realistic about retirement. And also, as you said, thinking about how to pay for a retirement in which you may be in retirement much longer than you think, both because you're retiring earlier and, people are likely to live quite a bit longer than they may think. If you reach age 65, chances are you're probably going to be living to 85 or longer. And what we find is that especially for people that are in minority groups like Hispanic and Black, they are probably reporting things like they are in their work life has been interrupted by needing to take care of somebody due to the pandemic or other reasons. And so there's going to be a lot of interruptions along the way to saving for retirement. So, to the Congresswoman's point, save as much as you can, as early as you can, because there's going to be a lot of obstacles likely along the way to saving, and you might be in for an earlier and longer retirement than you think.
So preparation is key. Back to those young people we're trying to motivate now to put just a little away that will compound and put you in a better position for whatever life brings your way. So as you both said, the average retirement age is typically 65. Some people, because of the pandemic, are saying, I'd like to retire early. How is this? You both have spoken to the challenge of how people managing, for whatever reason, early retirement. But what are some of the things in the policy, Secure 2.0, that could be helpful to people that may find they have to work a little longer, even if they don't want to, just to have adequate income? Congresswoman, what's what's in there that will be helpful to the almost ready to retire age group?
Sure. And Susan, I actually should have made very clear when you talked about younger workers and Secure 2.0 and student loan debt, if I could just also add to that, that it allows people to pay off their student debt instead of making those contributions to their retirement plans, but it also has a employer match to encourage young people to save for their retirement plans. And that, hopefully will help those newly graduated, workers that are, concerned about their student loan debt, hopefully get them on the path to paying those down quickly, and then also incentivizing their saving for the future. But in terms of, what would Secure 2.0 help with folks that are thinking about, retirement or retiring perhaps early? As I said, it creates incentives for small employers to create these savings plan, but it also increases and modernizes existing federal tax credit for contributions to a retirement plan or to an IRA. That's typically known as the Savers Credit. It allows Americans to save for retirement longer by increasing the required minimum distribution age to 75, so that if folks don't, don't exactly know when they're going to retire, the distribution age is now at 75. It makes it, it expands also savings options for nonprofit employees, which allows nonprofits to sort of join together and offer retirement plans to their employees in sort of a multi-employer retirement plan. And it offers individuals who are 50 and older the ability to set aside greater savings as they approach retirement. So let's say they are thinking about retiring earlier, they can be paying in greater amounts towards the end of their working years in order to prepare for their retirement. So those are just some of the things that Secure 2.0 would do to help folks who are thinking about retiring.
So it's suffice to say, it's a really important piece of legislation. Kudos to the House for passing it with, I think it was 415 yes votes. I mean, when does that ever happen? It is obviously a bill that has bipartisan support, and I think everybody who works in this space is hopeful the Senate will follow your good lead and get it passed, because there's a lot in there for every age and need, and we need to get it done to our protecting every future community. So Lori, when considering that life expectancy is increasing, how are people preparing what does your survey tell us with respect to that? How are they preparing for a longer retirement?
Well, one thing to keep in mind is that a key change between the today's retirees and those that are retiring going forward is that many, at least in the in the corporate side, will have much less access to a defined benefit plan. And so they're going to have, obviously Social Security is a guaranteed stream of income, but they'll lose that defined benefit plan stream of income that's guaranteed. And so we see that there's a much greater interest in things like guaranteed income for life products by people who are currently working, and even then the people that are already in retirement. So I think there's one thing that people are trying to figure out is not only how do I save appropriately for retirement, but I'm going to get there. I don't want to run out of money. And also there's a lot of angst around how much should I draw down? It's a very stressful process to, as we call it, decumulate your assets, and maybe even more complex in many ways than it is to accumulate it. And we're seeing more and more interest in some products and solutions that can help people with that process, as they're relying more and more on their own savings and their workplace retirement plans that are not defined benefit plans.
And Congresswoman, thinking about the financial protection industry, how can it work with you as policymakers to economically prepare for an aging population?
Sure. Well, the thing that I find I spend a lot of my time when I'm back in the district doing is just educating people on the policies that we're working on in DC and how they're going to impact their everyday life. So we need to first and foremost, work together to help people make informed decisions about their future. I mean, number one, get people thinking about their future and their retirement. But we also have to invest in people because there are, enormous looming costs from an aging population. AARP has called the wave of retirements that are coming from baby boomers the gray tsunami. And, having lived with two parents who are suffering from Alzheimer's and trying to raise a child, there are a lot of things you need to think about for an aging population. And if we don't begin to prepare to think about those things and prepare for them, then ultimately, those costs are going to be borne by taxpayers. So we need to really start thinking about long-term care, how to invest in resources to support caregivers and future retirees now, so that the costs aren't overwhelming in the future. And that means that we, have a lot more to do in terms of, policy to try to put the right systems in place. But it takes, all hands on deck. It takes the private sector also working with people to help them, craft a plan so that people are prepared for when they age. Because I think there's a common misconception that, Social Security will pay for long-term care for everyone in the United States. That's not the case. We need people to be thinking about what they need to do to provide the income stream they're going to need as they age. That's really, really critical.
Well, Congresswoman, I think we could have a whole nother program on just that topic alone. But suffice it to say that there's a lot being done in Washington to work with businesses, to work with people, to make solutions available. And we are very grateful for all of your leadership, Congresswoman Sanchez, and all of your leadership, Lori Lucas. And we're grateful for you spending time with us in our Protecting Every Future community at the kitchen table. So a tip of the coffee mug to all of you. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you
for having us.